2 months, starting December 14th, we're going to remove the GST, HST from groceries.
Tonight, the Liberal government is proposing to remove the GST and HST from certain items ahead of the holiday season.
1,100 Indigenous businesses were removed from the Indigenous Business Directory as part of a cleanup of businesses that were registered before 2019.
More than 1,000 businesses cut from Ottawa's Indigenous Procurement Policy Registry.
I think that that's something that people are going to be continuing to dig up over the next little bit here.
And our Truth in Politics panel weighs in on former Cabinet Minister Randy Boissonnault. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The Trudeau government is proposing removing the GST and HST from certain items like groceries, diapers, toys, restaurant meals, and more. The tax break would begin on December 14th and last for 2 months. The Prime Minister also announced a plan this morning for a new $250 Working Canadians rebate. The $250 checks would go out to nearly 19 million Canadians who filed a tax return for 2023 and earned less than $150,000. At a press conference this morning, Trudeau said those checks would go out in April. The pausing of the GST and HST would go into effect in mid-December. The proposals would need to be approved in the House of Commons.
For 2 months, starting December 14th, we're going to remove the GST, HST from groceries. 100% of groceries, all groceries. We're going to remove the GST from restaurant meals, takeouts, fast food. Removing the GST from beer and wine. Removing the GST for essentials like kids' clothing, footwear, diapers, and toys.
Last week, the NDP had proposed removing the tax from essential items permanently.
And we fought for this. We said this is important, and the Liberals informed us that they had caved to our demands. But they included a Liberal letdown. This is temporary, and it doesn't include the monthly bills. But we know that middle-class families need a break, so we're going to work as hard as possible to get this done as quickly as possible.
Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says today's announcement is a trick orchestrated by the NDP and the Liberals.
They've doubled housing costs, doubled the debt, doubled food bank use, doubled gun crime. With Jagmeet and Justin, it is double trouble for Canadians. Today, what we have is a 2-month temporary tax trick that will not make up for the permanent quadrupling carbon tax on heat, housing, food, and fuel, and all to save Justin's job and Jagmeet's pension.
Again, the temporary tax break would kick in on December 14th and stay in effect until February 15th. Still in Ottawa, Federal Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu has revealed that 1,100 businesses were removed from the Federal Indigenous Business Directory in 2022. The directory has been criticized by the Assembly of First Nations for what they call a lax verification process. The directory is a database of Indigenous businesses that can access contracts set aside for Indigenous companies. Federal departments and agencies are mandated to dedicate at least 5% of procurement to Indigenous businesses. There are currently 2,945 companies in the directory, and they must be at least 51% Indigenous owned to qualify for support. Yesterday, Liberal MP Randy Boissonnault was removed from cabinet for alleged false Indigenous identity claims. Boissonnault claimed a company applied for federal contracts while claiming to be Indigenous owned. The 2022 removal was revealed during a Tuesday standing committee meeting on government operations and estimate. Bloc Québécois MP Julie Vinola probed Haidu about the directory.
Now, over the past few months, we noticed, or it was found, that some businesses were found to not be Indigenous, even though they qualified themselves as such. I was wondering, during the audits or the checks, were there businesses that ended up not being actual Indigenous businesses?
Every 2 years, the department audits the indigeneity of businesses, just because businesses transform quite a bit in between audits. And today, in 2022, 1,100 Indigenous businesses were removed from the Indigenous Business Directory as part of a cleanup of businesses that were registered before 2019.
APTN News asked Minister Haidu's office why the removal of the 1,100 businesses was in 2022 was announced in 2024, and how many of the companies were found to be non-Indigenous. Haidu's press secretary Jennifer Kozel said businesses listed on the IBD are audited every 2 years to verify eligibility. They said businesses can be removed for a variety of reasons, including closures, changes in ownership, or control and requests to be delisted. The 1,100 businesses were removed in 2022 by a review by Indigenous Services Canada. Members of a First Nation in northwestern Ontario are ready to escalate their call for action to address rising crime and addiction rates. Leadership in Pic-Mobert recently declared a state of emergency due to gang activity, which they say is due to a lack of policing resources. And they're demanding action from the federal and provincial governments. APTN's Mike McDonald has more.
The chief of Nipmuc Anishinaabe, otherwise known as Pic-Mobert, says the community is at a crisis point following a series of violent incidents stemming from the unchecked presence of organized crime, which leadership says is due to inadequate policing resources.
Community members are acting on behalf of these organized crimes. They're doing a lot of these violent crimes to other community members.
People are seeing that window and that gap of lawlessness that leads to an environment where people are taking advantage of that situation, mainly organized crime gangs, where they're exploiting the situation that we have a lack in policing services, such that I'd go so far to say is that we are becoming a warehouse for the drug epidemic for the region.
Chief Quiswa says the violent incidents coupled with delayed emergency response has people fearing for their safety, even in their own homes.
A lot of our people don't feel safe, particularly our elders. I've had conversations with community members indicating that they don't feel safe and they're worried at night and they're worried about the mental health of their children.
The state of emergency was a topic of discussion in the Ontario legislature this week as NDP MP Saul Mamakwa brought it up during question period.
The lack of police presence and delays in emergency response has created a crisis. To the Premier, will you commit today to answer Nipmuc and Anishinaabe specific calls to action to bring the First Nation out of state emergency?
Mr. Speaker, when the federal government comes to the table and antes up more money to do the right thing, Ontario will do it as well.
They use jurisdiction as an excuse not to do anything. And they outright said that when I asked that during question period, that's what they is. We're going to wait for the feds, see what they do.
However, Nipmuc Anishinaabe leadership says they won't wait for jurisdictional squabbles to be resolved, that they're prepared to increase the pressure on the government.
We will disrupt the economy. We will look at solutions such as demonstrations as roadblocks, protests. If we need to go that far, we're prepared to do so because lives are at risk. And if the provincial and federal government do not respond, we'll go to those measures if we need to.
Chief Quiswa and CEO Moses were in Toronto earlier this week for a scheduled meeting with Ontario cabinet ministers to discuss how to bring an end to the state of emergency. However, that meeting was cancelled at the last minute. Mike McDonald, APTN National News.
Thanks, Mike. Time for a quick break. Coming up next, our Truth in Politics panel is here to discuss Randy Boissonnault's shifting claims of Indigenous identity and his departure from Cabinet. Stick around. Welcome back. It was a tumultuous week for Randy Boissonnault, the Liberal MP for Edmonton Centre. Up until Wednesday, he was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's employment minister. Now he isn't. The PM announced Wednesday that Boissonnault was out of Cabinet, so he could, quote, clear the air on his claims of being Indigenous. Our Truth in Politics panel is here to weigh in. Winnipeg Free Press columnist Neegon Sinclair and Pasqua Harbour's CEO Jennifer Leywitz join us now. Jennifer Neegon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, we'll start with you, and maybe if you can walk us back a little here. And what was the nature of Randy Boissonnault's claims of being Indigenous, and did it seem like there was any substance to that? And how was he found out?
Well, there's been a few instances where he has claimed Indigenous identity, and there's been some misconceptions around how that came to be. I did notice over the last couple of weeks, while these claims were coming to the forefront, it seems like more and more information is now coming out. It sounds like allegedly he was claiming that his business was Indigenous owned during the pandemic when they secured a business that would secure and distribute PPE materials. But also now there's like video footage coming out of him visiting various different nations. There was one where he visited Enoch Cree Nation and then proceeded to give his eagle or his Cree name, which was Strong Eagle Man or something like that, and spoke a few words in Cree. So there's been many instances where his identity claiming to be Indigenous has been at the forefront of many conversations and promotion from the Liberal government. And I think that that's something that people are going to be continuing to dig up over the next little bit here.
Neegon, the opposition has been accusing the former minister of using indigeneity as a way of procuring financial support from the federal government. What do we know about that so far?
Well, the reality is that there's a whole host of this. It's a quagmire of I myself, when you are a person who this is a contract with the federal government, you have to register with the Indigenous Business Bureau. You have to get vetted, but the vetting process is very obscure. It really is just on your own self-declaration, and there is a ton of room for fraudulent claims or people to make fraudulent claims of being Indigenous or not. For instance, you don't have to provide much proof whatsoever. You don't have to provide any community affiliations. And what the national chief said was that there needs to be some kind of strategy, and it has to be First Nations led, also Métis led, in which people can be recognized by members of communities and Inuit governments, for example, that they are part of communities. And if not, then what happens is we get continual people who are checking boxes, claiming to be something that they aren't. And it's not to say that there isn't a whole host of people in the country who are desiring to come home, who have long time in which they've been removed, often very legitimate, the child welfare system example. But First Nations and Métis people are finding ways to bring them home. The problem is that checking a box, saying that you're Indigenous when you have no community affiliations or membership or even ancestry in some cases, is not the way in which you come home. We need to have a way in which Indigenous peoples can lead the process, in which people can claim to be Indigenous, but they will be part of our sovereign nations with our membership codes, and those have to be led by our people.
Jennifer, Boissonnault's now out of cabinet, but do you think that's gone far enough? Should he be right out of the party?
I think so. I honestly, I don't understand how anybody could make excuses for something like this. And I have seen a lot of excuses over the last few days where people saying, you know, how is it his fault if this was something that he was told? And that right there, to me, places that very stereotypical and surface level understanding onto what our identity actually means. And if there are people that are saying, well, you know, he was told he was Indigenous, but that doesn't absolve you of any responsibility to actually verify or attempt to verify the claim that you are putting out that you are Indigenous. Because at the end of the day, if you were just told a story that you're Indigenous and your first instinct is to run, to utilize that concept of identity for financial gain, political gain, whatever it might be, I'm sorry, that needs to be heavily criticized, because at the end of the day, our identity is more than just opportunity that people think that they can find out of it. So honestly, I don't see how this is not landing him outside of the party. I think this is a very big deal. It sends ripple effects across, you know, Indigenous people across the country, and the opportunity that might have been lost because he may have took it. But not just that, where's the accountability and integrity? If you actually stand for reconciliation, this to me should be grounds for being removed.
Niigaan, are you at all stunned by any of this? You know, another person here, a federal cabinet minister. Are you stunned that this has happened again?
I think what's most sad about this is how easy it is to procure money from your own government, your own party, and just that the fact that this was allowed to take place for so long. It is really tragic, I think, for all of us as taxpayers, as people who are part of a community in which I think most Canadians are interested and engaged or wanting in some way or another to begin to rectify the harms of the past and begin to bring, encourage, empower Indigenous communities to be able to come up to an economic livelihood. And the problem with this is that this really sets things back, and it should be from someone who knows better. It should be someone from someone who is part of a party that has done some very important and valuable work. Like, to simply cast off the Liberals and say that they haven't done some really important work is just to ignore some really significant legislation that they've done. But it is certainly evidence that there are parts, even within the Liberal Party, that are pretty insipid and certainly show that there is a lot of people who are rubbing each other's backs or perhaps turning the other way when there are some very suspicious things that's been done in the name of Indigenous peoples that I'm not sure, I'm not certain, I'm not 100% certain that we're going to just cast off around Boston and say he isn't Indigenous. I'm very curious as to see whether he is going to clear up some of these allegations, but I am here to say that there is certainly a whole lot of smoke that looks like a fire.
Niigaan, Jennifer, we're going to leave it there. Thanks to you both for being here. Viewers, of course, can catch more of this conversation on the Truth and Politics podcast, where you can find wherever you download your podcasts.
Okay, see you guys later. Thanks.
Well, as you can imagine, the fallout over Randy Bosino will be a topic of discussion on tonight's episode of Nation to Nation, right after this newscast. We'll bring you a preview of that and this weekend's new episode of APTN Investigates after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Amanda from the Woodstock First Nation was hunting with her son when they spotted, or maybe were spotted, by these moose who were also hunting for some grub. Thanks for sharing, Amanda. Send your photos to share@aptn.ca, and you might just be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 8 with showers in Halifax, 9 and rain in Fredericton. -2 and cloudy in Kuujjuaq, cloudy and 0 for Nain. Showers and 9 in Montreal, rain and 6 in Val-d'Or. 6 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie, North Bay, and Peterborough. 5 with rain in Thunder Bay, snow, and -1 in Sioux Lookout. -4 with snow for God's Lake, 6 with flurries in Norway House. -6 in Winnipeg with snow on the way, 7 below and snow in Dauphin. Flurries and -8 in Regina, 10 below in Saskatoon. -10 in Meadow Lake, cloudy and 12 below in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, -12 with snow in Fort Chip, 14 below and snow in Grand Prairie. 10 below and snow in Lethbridge, -11 in flurries in Edmonton. Rain and 11 above for Vancouver and Victoria. -9 with snow in Prince George, 4 above and sunny in Prince Rupert. -23 with snow in Old Crow, 14 below with snow in Whitehorse. -16 and snow in Yellowknife, snow and 15 below in Norman Wells. Snowy and -19 in Sax Harbor, -10 with snow in Paulatuck. Flurries and -4 in Chesterfield, 0 for Whale Cove and Arviette. Minus 21 with snow in Resolute. Snow and minus 13 in Joe Haven. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Fraser is standing by with a look at tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Coming up after the news, Randy Boissonneau is out of the Liberal cabinet for false claims of indigeneity. We'll talk to the NDP's Blake Desjardins about what it all means. In the 1950s and 1960s, the people of Inuvik were forced to stand by as government-sanctioned agencies killed more than 1,000 of their sled dogs. We'll talk to Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Gary Anasandagri about the apology the government plans to make to the community this weekend. All this ahead on Nation to Nation.
Busy show there. Thanks, Fraser. APTN Investigates returns this week with an all-new episode. In Their Worst Fears, video journalist Rob Smith looks into a recent mining disaster in the Yukon. This past June, as you may recall, a heap leach failure at Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine resulted in the release of cyanide on the traditional territory of the Nacho-Nayakdun First Nation. Here's a preview.
To cover the story, I had to come home. The Yukon. The place I grew up. The place I started my career driving these familiar roads. Back to Mayo, 350 kilometers north of Whitehorse. A place I visited many times. Nacho-Nayakdun First Nation Chief Donna Hope is my guide.
I am the first female elected chief in the First Nation of Nacho-Nayakdun.
She'll have the blow-by-blow of this catastrophic mining failure. Along for the ride is her husband Gary and her emotional support pup Freddie.
We are headed up to the Victoria Gold Eagle mine site where the heap leach failure happened.
Over the years, the First Nation has expressed serious concerns on the mine's operation. Last year, reports showed improper water storage on site. The First Nation demanded the company put in place appropriate measures to reduce the unacceptable risks.
And we would like to actually see it closed until we can figure out a better way forward.
Looks good. You can catch APTN Investigates Their Worst Fears this Saturday on APTN. Really like Rob's road music there. He's got a great taste in music. We'll speak with him tomorrow night right here on the newscast. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For the very latest, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And Creason will be here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with your first look at the day's news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Stick around. Fraser is up next with Nation to Nation. We'll see you back here tomorrow.